Welcome to the Glenn Mercer Show, where we talk all things vegan. If you're not already vegan, no worries, we'll get you there. If you are, tune in for health advice, information on climate change, and all the damage done by our most destructive industry, animal agriculture. We'll also talk cooking, theater, film, and culture. My 2 reasons for starting this podcast: to entertain, to inform, and to make people vegan. Oh, that's 3. Shit. Welcome to the Glenn Mercer Show. You could find us across all your favorite podcast platforms. You could find us on YouTube, and please remember to subscribe. You could find us at realmeneatplants.com. My special guest today is Dr. John Tanner, not a medical doctor, but he has a master's in science and electrical engineering and a PhD in computer science from Caltech. He's the founder of Tanner Research. He's the founder of the Nutrition Science Foundation. You can find that at nusci.org. And he's the founder of a plant-based business called Little Green Forks. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Glenn. It's so great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I know, John, that you're going to make a compelling case today for eating plant-based, but we have a real opportunity today because where I am, there's going to be possible thunderstorms and a slight risk of a tornado. So if a tornado hits and I get blown away, right? If first you have to make a really compelling case for the plant-based diet, but if we can time this right, a tornado hits and I get blown away and hit by flying bricks, then this video could go viral, which would be very good for the vegans. So let's try to time this. All right. You're going to do it, right, John?
I am going to try. There's a lot of pressure now.
Yeah. All right. All right. So, John, you have a story to tell about how you came to be plant-based and your life was at stake. So I'm going to let you share the screen now and tell your story.
Thanks so much. And you can see this at this point on my screen?
Yes.
Very good. As Glenn said, I'm involved in 2 different organizations, the nonprofit Nutrition Science Foundation, which, by the way, Glenn Mercer is a member of the board. So thank you for that, Glenn, for many years.
It's been hard work, but I'm happy to do it.
And Little Green Forks, healthy food company. I'll say more about both of those as we go along. I'm going to talk about how I almost died needlessly. And the question is, will you, Glenn's listeners, viewers, die needlessly? And I hope the answer to that is no. And I'm going to share what I hope will be important to you to know to not die needlessly. We're going to talk about heart disease and some other diseases as well, and health through nutrition and some strategies for success. So here we're about to dive in. My story starts about 20 years ago when my wife says to me, "John, do you know that you have the body of a god?" And I said, "No, really?" She hadn't said anything remotely like that to me before. And she says, "Yes, you do have the body of a god. Unfortunately, the god is Buddha." And this is not exactly a physique one wants to quest after, but I had to admit that around the midsection, I did kind of look a little bit like Buddha. The Buddha belly was there. So I thought I needed to do something about this. I really, really did. So I started exercising. I ran a mile every day. I ran this mile route around near my house for 5 years with no problem whatsoever. And on one day, October 11th, 2009, I got about a third away into my route. And according to witnesses, I don't remember any of this, by the way, because of lack of oxygen to the brain at the time, but I was running normally, staggered a couple of steps and hit the ground unconscious with my heart stopped. Wow. This is how much warning you have of heart disease. It's the disease that affects your arteries on the inside of you. So you can't see what's going on in there. There's no nerve endings in there. So you really don't necessarily have any idea of what's going on. You can think you're healthy, and the next moment you're on the ground dead. Now, I did survive. Thankfully, I didn't die. And I started learning some things about heart disease. I learned that heart disease is the leading killer in this country. Probably most people know that. Some people think of heart disease as more of a men's disease, and at the younger ages, more men die of heart disease than women do. But at older ages, more women die of heart disease than men do. So by the time it's all over, it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. If you live in this country, the United States, the disease that's most likely to kill you, than more likely than any other disease, is heart disease. Well, you may have known that. What you may not be aware of is that sudden cardiac arrest is the most common form of heart disease. You can have a heart attack where the heart doesn't stop, or you can have angina or angina, which is severe chest pain, but the heart is more or less beating normally. But of those three things, sudden cardiac arrest is the most common. And if that happens to you outside of the hospital, your chances of surviving are about 3%. So you take all these three facts together: leading killer, most common form, and a really low survival rate. And what that means is people all over the place are dying suddenly. And we hear in the news about some famous people. It wasn't too long ago, the mayor of San Francisco was healthy, and then the next day he's dead of heart disease. But it's not just famous people. It's our friends, our coworkers, our family. Probably everyone that's listening to this knows somebody that seemed fine one day, and the next day they're just gone of heart disease. So in this context, me having sudden cardiac arrest isn't unusual. Surviving it is a little unusual. There's not too many of us that manage that. And I'm really lucky. This low survival rate is part of what drives me to share what I've learned with others, because for most people, by the time they know they have heart disease, they're dead, and they have no chance to learn anything, and certainly no chance to share it with anybody else. So my good fortune of surviving is part of what drives me to share what I've learned with others. When they got me to the hospital that day, they had me on the table with x-raying my heart. And the doctor cut an incision on the inside of my thigh where the femoral artery is, and he fed a small plastic tube through my arteries around the aorta, which comes out of the top of the heart. And then the tube turned a corner to go into one of the small arteries that feed the heart muscle. Now, the heart muscle, it's pumping a lot of blood with a lot of oxygen and nutrients through the middle of it, but it can't actually absorb those things there. It needs its own separate supply of blood, which it gets from these little cardiac arteries that spread throughout the heart muscle. So the doctor got me on the table, and as he's looking at the screen where he can see my heart muscle, although not very well because the x-ray goes straight through the tissue, but he can see a couple of my ribs there, and he can see the end of this little plastic tube that he inserted. And he pushes a foot pedal, which squirts radio-opaque dye into the tube that's sticking out of my leg. The dye goes through the tube, comes out into the little heart artery, and the doctor can see the results. He can see the blood flow through the cardiac arteries, and he can see where there's a clog. And I have to admit, and I'll share with you the information that forced me to admit this, I did this to myself. I clogged my own artery. And then, sadly to say, the vast majority of Americans are in the process of clogging their arteries. There may be even some people that are listening right now that are in the process of clogging their own arteries, but you don't have to do it. And I'll share with you how you can avoid clogging your arteries. But I did survive that event, thankfully. The first few days in the hospital were a little dicey. I would wake up and I would see my wife and I would say, "Where am I? What happened?" And she'd say, "Well, you had a heart attack. You're in the hospital." And I'd go, "Oh," and I'd drift off. And a few minutes later, I'd wake up and I'd say, "Where am I? What happened?" I could not remember the conversation from 5 minutes before. And the reason was the lack of oxygen to the brain during this time when my heart was stopped. Now, they weren't sure I was going to come back. But after a couple of days, I could remember the conversation from 10 minutes before. Yay. And after 5 days, they sent me home. They said, "Don't go back to work just yet." So I took another week off from work. But in 2 weeks, from dead on the street to back to work, I thought that was pretty good. But they said, "Don't go back to running just yet," because of that small percentage of cardiac arrest patients that survive, the 3%. Most of those 3% have residual brain damage or heart muscle damage or both. I seem to be okay in the brain part of it. Although when I forget my anniversary, I say, "Oh, honey, it was the heart attack." It's a good excuse for all kinds of senior moments. But after my cardiac arrest, they were concerned that the heart muscle that had been deprived of oxygen for a while might have residual damage. So they did some more tests, perfusion test that involves a radioactive substance and some special imaging. But after that was over, they didn't find any significant damage to my heart muscle. Yay. And the doctor said, "You can go back to your life the way it was." And at first, I took it the way he meant it, which is this traumatic event that has, turned your life upside down and caused great concern for your friends, your family, your coworkers. You can just sort of forget about this and let it recede into the past. And that's the way I took it at first. But after I started thinking about his words, "My life the way it was, my life the way it was." If that life included cardiac arrest, I didn't want to go back there. And I started asking these other questions. Was my life the way it was the cause? At this point, I had no idea what caused heart disease. I do now, and if you haven't figured it out already, you will very soon know what the cause of heart disease is. But I didn't know, and I wanted to know, what causes it and can it be prevented or reversed? And as Glenn said at the beginning, my background is not medical or biological, but I do have a science background, and I really wanted to understand these questions. And this has really consumed me for the last 14, 15 years. I started reading medical journals. I started going to conferences. In fact, it was one of those conferences where I met Glenn. Yay. Long friendship that came from that. But I started learning about what causes heart disease, and this is what I wanted to share with you guys today. Eventually, I found my way to this book called Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease by Caldwell Esselstyn. And there's some really interesting things in this book. He says nearly half the people in the US will suffer heart disease. Not all of those half will die of it, but half the people will suffer from it. Wow, that's a big deal. He says you should know your cholesterol levels, both your total cholesterol and your LDL. And just as importantly as knowing your own numbers is knowing what the healthy numbers are. And if there's anything that you take away from this today, I would love it if it were these two numbers. Your total cholesterol should be below 150 milligrams per deciliter, and your LDL, the so-called bad cholesterol, should be below 80 milligrams per deciliter. If that is the case with you right now, and you're not on any medications, you're just naturally, normally at those levels, you can tune out. Sorry, Glenn, they can shut this off, because nothing I can say will reduce their chances of having heart disease, because they won't have it.
Now
But
keep listening, folks. Don't listen to him. Okay, go ahead, John.
But sadly, Glenn, most of the people are well above these numbers. And some of them are a lot higher than these numbers. So know your numbers and know what the safe numbers are. And if your numbers aren't in the right category, this doctor, Caldwell Esselstyn, this MD, says, fix the problem yourself. Doctors cannot fix this problem. This is either, these two sentences together are either great news or terrible news, depending on your personality type. If you're the one who wants to live your life carefree and do whatever the heck you want, and if you have medical problems, you'll go to the doctor and they'll fix it. This is bad news because the doctors cannot fix the leading killer in this country. But if you're the type of person who wants to decide for yourself whether you're going to be healthy or sick, you want to decide for yourself whether you're going to live a long time or cut your life short needlessly, this is great news because you can fix this problem yourself. But if you don't fix it, the medical establishment has some things that they would do to you or have you do to yourself. And these are the standard things. They would have you take some medications. They're a family of drugs called statin drugs. The trade names are Lipitor, Zocor, Crestor. There's each of those has a generic name, simvastatin, atorvastatin. Turns out that these medications that they recommend often don't work very well, and they have harmful side effects. And we'll talk about both of those in a moment. In addition to the medications, the doctors would often want to put in stents, these metal mesh tubes that they insert through, say, your slit in your leg through this little plastic tube that they slide into the heart area and then expand the metal mesh. It's awesome technology. It doesn't cure heart disease. I'm going to share statistics in just a moment on stents. We do around 1 million of these a year in this country that get put into people, and they don't cure heart disease. The other next thing the doctors would do is CABG, which is sometimes called cabbage or coronary artery bypass graft, or often they just call it bypass surgery. They take a small blood vessel somewhere else in your body, usually your leg, and they cut open your chest bone and find the artery on the outside of your heart that has a clog, and they sew this other blood vessel from somewhere else in your body that they cut out, and they sew it ahead of and past the clog, giving an alternate path for the blood to flow around the clog, thus bypassing it. But those surgeries don't cure heart disease. They don't do anything to address the root cause, and often people that have bypass surgeries have problems soon after. You may remember President Clinton had bypass surgery, and shortly after he had more heart problems. He eventually found out the real cause of heart disease and addressed that, but the bypass surgery didn't help much. We spend about $10 billion on the drugs alone, and by the time we add in stents and bypass surgeries, we're in the neighborhood of $50 billion in this country, not million, billion dollars that we spend on these things that don't cure heart disease. And by the way, this is just the medical costs. If you add in missed work and funerals and other things like that, the cost of heart disease is more in the neighborhood of $200 billion a year. But diet can prevent and reverse heart disease. Interesting. Well, let's look at that. But before we do, it seems to me that one of the reasons that we have so much heart disease in this country is we can't judge the effect of our food choices because we don't know what happens once they get inside our body. Once it's past the lips and the teeth, you don't see it. You don't know what the results were of that choice that you just made to eat. So I've got a couple of video clips here. Sorry about the audio only, folks. But I'll describe what's going on here. This doctor is going to look at two blood samples in test tubes that were taken from two different patients. The patient on the left gave a sample, and as all the blood tests, they let them sit for quite a while so the different components separate out. The the red blood cells on the bottom and the white and plasma on the top. And so this doctor is going to look at these two, and he'll tell you a little bit about them.
Now, normally, this liquid layer floating on top of the blood clot is quite transparent. It's a yellow, but quite clear. You can see right through it. The blood in this patient's tube, however, was anything but clear. The serum floating on his clot was thick and greasy white. It looked like glue. In fact, it stuck to the sides of the blood tube when I shook the tube. I went back to the patient. I said, Mr. Phillips, did you eat before you came to the hospital tonight? He said, yes. I said, what did you have? He said, I had a cheeseburger and a milkshake. And when he said that, I realized that what I was looking at in his tube was all the fat in the beef burger, all the butter fat in the cheese, and the butter fat in the ice cream and in the milkshake.
Now, if you have at some point in your life had a milkshake and a cheeseburger, don't worry too much, because your body is awesome. It can clear that gunk out of your arteries that you put in there from this bad stuff that you ate. But it takes hours. It takes 10 or 12 hours. This is why they tell you don't eat anything for 10 or 12 hours before you give the blood sample. And obviously this guy didn't do that. But what do most Americans do before that 10 or 12 hours has passed and the body has had a chance to clear all this stuff away? They eat some more of the same stuff. So most Americans are bathing the insides of their arteries with this gluey gunk 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Even then, your body is amazing. It continues to try clearing that away. And for the most part, keeps your arteries working well enough to keep you alive. How long it can hold out, it's hard to say. For me, it was 52 years before it got me. But you might be less than that or more than that. Now, this gentleman who gave this blood test, we might guess that this cheeseburger and milkshake that he had before the blood test wasn't the first one. We might guess that that was sort of a regular part of his diet. And so it's interesting to look inside of him to see what the results are of him eating this way over and over and over.
The next morning, we took Mr. Phillips to the operating room, and I put him to sleep, and the surgeon opened up his chest. And from these arteries, he began pulling out yellow, greasy deposits of fatty material called atherosclerosis.
So it's like a yellow string of gunk that they're pulling out of this guy's artery. Now, you need to understand that this surgery that they're doing doesn't cure him. The deposits, the yellow deposits, actually don't happen on the inside wall of the artery. They work their way past the first layer of cells, the endothelium, the skin layer of skin cells on the inside of the artery, and they build up behind that. But they push the artery closed to pull this gunky yellow stuff, string of stuff out of this guy's artery. They're also removing the inner lining of his artery that has like 10 different major functions in keeping the artery working properly. So it actually harms this guy and reduces his lifespan by doing this surgery. So they don't do this surgery anymore. But it's very interesting to note that one can go in and look and see the very specific results of eating those cheeseburgers and milkshakes. I want to talk a little bit about cholesterol blood tests. The cholesterol in the blood at the moment is not what causes death. And there is supposed to be some cholesterol in our blood. Our liver produces it. Wherever your cells are dividing and creating new cell walls, they need a supply of cholesterol to make the cell walls from. But generally, your liver produces the appropriate quantity and appropriate types of cholesterol. But there's another source of cholesterol in your blood, which is from the animal products you eat. No plant products whatsoever have cholesterol in them. A lot of the animal products do, whether that's meat, dairy, eggs. Even so, the cholesterol that's in your body at the moment is not what kills you. It's that long exposure to that elevated cholesterol that builds up those gunky yellow deposits that eventually get you. But they have found that measuring the total cholesterol in your blood, which again is the sum of the stuff that's supposed to be there that your liver produced, and this other stuff that came from your animal products in your diet that really would be better if it weren't there. If they measure that level of cholesterol, it is a pretty good indicator of the likelihood of death. The Framingham Heart Study has been going on for a long time. Framingham is a small city outside of Boston where they would take blood samples for decades, and then they would track people to see what happened. And what they found is if you have a high level of cholesterol in your blood, you're more likely to die of heart attacks. And not too surprising, given that if you're have high cholesterol now, even though that isn't what's killing you, you probably had high cholesterol yesterday and the week before, the month before, and it's really that long-term level of cholesterol that's doing you in. And they found that under some conditions, this marker is an effective diagnostic tool. What that means is, yes, go ahead and get that blood test, and it is a pretty good indicator of whether you're totally healthy, slightly at risk, or so at risk that you better go to the emergency room right away. The one exception to this is if you're on medications, they mess up this marker, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But if you're not on medications and you wonder whether you're about to die of heart disease or not, this would be a good way to find out. Go get the blood test. Now, I'm a patient of Kaiser Permanente and health maintenance organization. When I go for a blood test, it comes back from the lab and it says, here's your number and here's the standard number. And they give that to you on the test result form so that you can kind of compare yourself to the standard. And the Kaiser standard number is 200. Well, you remember we already said that it needs to be below 150 to be healthy. So I called up Kaiser and said, where do you get this 200 number from? That's the standard. And they said, oh, well, we get it from the American Heart Association. So I called up the American Heart Association and said, where do you get this 200 number? And they said, well, it's roughly the average of all Americans. Okay, this is an average among a group of people whose leading cause of death is heart disease. You do not want to be average. You want to be healthy. So don't believe that this 200 is okay. In fact, the Framingham Heart Study that established the correlation between this measurement and death due to heart disease, they found that a third of the people with heart disease had cholesterol between 150 and 200. So being below 200 is better than being above 200, no question about that. But just because you're below 200 doesn't mean you're safe. And I'm a great example of that. My last blood test before my cardiac arrest, I was at 188. So if your doctor or somebody is telling you, oh, you're under 200, you're okay, not necessarily. Don't buy into that. And here's another study that I ran into. It's June 2010 study that showed the statin drugs break the correlation between the blood test measurement and your likelihood of death. What does that mean? It means the cholesterol blood tests go down if you take these medications, making you think you're healthier, but you still die nearly as often. Wow. Let me give you an analogy. If you're driving your car and you see the red check engine light come on, you know that the red light itself isn't the problem. It's an indicator that deep inside your engine in an invisible way, you've got a problem. But you know that it's serious, so you take it to the mechanic. Your car comes back the next day and the check engine light is off. You go, yay, the mechanic fixed the problem. But then if you happen to look under the dashboard and you located the wires going to the red light, and they looked like this, you might conclude that in fact, the mechanic didn't fix the problem deep inside the engine. He just clipped the wires. He disabled the indicator, making you think that your engine wasn't having any problem anymore. And I think you would be really angry with the mechanic if you saw that, because he was fooling you. So don't let the statin drugs fool you into thinking you're healthy just because they bring down your cholesterol blood test numbers. Now, what are these drugs doing if they're bringing down the number, but not increasing your lifespan? What they're doing is they're inhibiting the liver's natural production of cholesterol. These drugs are chosen specifically to mess up what your liver's supposed to be doing. Let me put it a different way. These are liver poisons. These are liver toxins that your doctor is convincing you to put into your system to screw up the production of cholesterol that's supposed to happen while doing nothing whatsoever about the cholesterol that's in your bloodstream from the animal products you ate. So what is the outcome when you take these drugs? Bunch of side effects, biggest one being liver damage. Now, when I was taking these drugs, which I did for about a year after my cardiac arrest, before I found out how terrible they were, at that time, the fine print on my drug said, if you take this statin drug for any length of time, you should take a standard liver test. And if that liver test shows damage, you should discontinue the use of this medication. If you take statin drugs today and look in the fine print that comes with the drug, you won't see that statement anymore. Why? Did they find that statin drugs aren't causing liver damage? No. What they found was the standard liver test doesn't show the damage caused by the statin drugs to the liver, because that liver test was designed for alcoholism and other causes of liver damage. So don't believe that you're okay. Another common side effect with statin drugs is muscle soreness. Now, after I recovered from my cardiac arrest and I was on the statin drugs, when I went through physical therapy and I mentioned that I was running a mile a day, they said, well, that 7-minute run, that isn't quite long enough for you should have elevated heart rate for maybe 20 minutes instead of 7. So I started running 3 miles instead of 1. And all throughout the day, my body was sore. And I thought, this is just because I'm running more. Well, eventually I found out about how bad the statin drugs were and I got off of them. And all of a sudden, my muscles didn't hurt anymore. I could run 3 miles every day and not have the muscle soreness. Other common side effect of statin drugs is a set of brain problems that look a lot like Alzheimer's. And if you know about Alzheimer's disease, you know that it's not reversible. There's no treatment that we know today that can reverse Alzheimer's. But there are people that are taking statin drugs and they're given a tentative diagnosis of Alzheimer's. Now, you can't have a conclusive diagnosis until death, where they cut the skull open and look at your brain and see if it's kind of rotted away, in which case it's Alzheimer's. But when people are on statin drugs, they often have similar symptoms, which is short-term memory loss, cognition issues, concentration problems, and they're assumed to have Alzheimer's. But then they take them off the drug and they get better, which means it wasn't Alzheimer's at all. It was the drug. Wow. Now, Glenn, I know you've got some really smart people that are listening and watching here, and probably all of them can spare some brain cells. Who cares if some of them are killed by the statins, but they're still smart enough. I'm not. I need every one of my brain cells working. And this was the most concerning thing that I found about taking these statin drugs.
I actually have the smartest audience on YouTube. It's been verified in a peer-reviewed paper. Go ahead.
All right. Great. Glad to hear. Well, as I read these medical journals and went to conferences, talked to experts and so on, I found I would bump into these studies, and I found 5 of them that I was very interested in, each one of them individually. But after a while, I realized that I could compare them. So these are 5 things that might happen to you after you have heart disease. And you need to understand, this isn't one big study where they did 5 different things. It's 5 different studies. But the thing that allows me to compare them is each of these good, well-done studies has a control group. That is, they're comparing 2 sets of people that are otherwise equivalent, and one of them gets the treatment and one of them doesn't get the treatment. So the first paper of it that was really interesting to me was one about stents, because they gave me a stent when I had cardiac arrest, and oh, by the way, it failed, and they gave me 3 more stents, and one of those failed, and they gave me 3 more stents. So now I've got 7. I don't know when I might have to get more, because I could go on and on about how horrible these are. But I found this study that had to do with stents. So they took this medical practice, took patients that were candidates for stents, and they would arbitrarily choose to give half of them stents and half of them not stents. And they tracked each group of patients for years to follow. And they eventually published their results, which were death rate per patient for the group that didn't get the treatment. And I scaled that to be 100%. And then the other death rate for the group of people who did get the stents. And I applied the same scaling to that. And it comes out to be 97% of the death rate of the other one, which means if of the people who had heart disease and didn't get a stent, 97% of the ones who did get a stent would still die. It's minimally effective, maybe 3%. And yet the doctors hold this out as, wow, this has done great things for you. Well, the next paper I ran into had to do with blood tests for people taking statin drugs. So there was 2 groups of people, both had elevated cholesterol. One group was given the statin drugs for a period of time, and then they remeasured their cholesterol in their blood. And I compared the cholesterol blood test levels of the 2 groups. And the group that didn't get the statin drugs, they pretty much stayed the same cholesterol levels. But the ones who did get the statin drugs, they went down. So 85% of the people that took the statin drugs got their cholesterol down to the target. Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, statin drugs work. They work to lower the blood test measurements. Do we care about the blood test measurements? We only care about them if they correlate with the actual death rate. Well, okay, so let's go to this next paper I found, which compared the death rate of people getting statin drugs. So this is the June 2010 study I mentioned before. There were 65,000 patients split into 2 groups. They all had heart disease, all elevated cholesterol. The half of them didn't get any treatment, half of them got the statin drugs. They tracked them for years to follow to see what the death rate was. The death rate for the group that didn't take the drug, I scaled that to 100%. I applied the same scaling to the death rate for the group who got the statin drugs, 91%. Means 91% of the people that take the statins still die. Wow. Now the author of this study said within the error bounds of the study, we cannot conclude any benefit from statin drugs.
Well,
Wow.
to be fair, John, they die with better numbers.
Yeah. Thank you. Put that on your gravestone. I got better numbers. Yeah. Glenn, I love how you can look lightheartedly at these very serious things. I appreciate it. So the author said, can't conclude any benefit, but mathematically, one would have to say there's a 9% benefit. That's the most likely. Could be higher or lower than that. And it's not much, but mathematically, most likely is 9%. The thing that bugs me about this, though, is that the doctors hand out these medications. They don't say how pitifully low benefit you get from it. And they don't mention the side effects, liver damage, muscle soreness, cognition issues. But they present this as the solution to your problem. And that is, in many cases, would prevent people from looking further. Are there other solutions out there? Well, let's look at a couple more. The next study I ran into was the EPIC study, EPIC study from the UK, where for years they would ask people, what do you eat? And they found that people there eat pretty much the way we do, very Western diet that includes lots of meat and dairy and eggs. But also, like here, there was a small percentage of people that just chose to not eat meat. So they would be considered vegetarians. Vegetarian might still eat animal products, including dairy and eggs, but no meat. So they tracked these people's and published some death rates for the group who ate pretty much like most Americans and the group that just chose to not eat meat. Again, scaled the death rates, and we find that the vegetarian death rate is about 65% of the death rate of the people that eat normal with meat in their diet. Now, there's still a lot of deaths. I mean, 65% is still significantly high. And you could say, well, maybe that's not that different than the 91% who died taking just the drugs, 65 to 91. But if you look at it the other way, which is what is the reduction in death? The reduction from the drugs was 9%. And the reduction from getting meat out of your diet is like 35%. It's more than 3 times more effective to get meat out of your diet than to take the statin drugs.
John, is this just heart disease death or all death?
Great question. The statin deaths, the 91 is all causes, because the statin drugs actually reduce death due to heart disease a little bit more than the 9%, but they increase deaths due to cancer and diabetes and some other things. So it's all causes.
Okay.
So what a doctor should do is they should say, well, we have this medication we can give you and it has a very small benefit and a bunch of bad side effects, or just cut meat out of your diet and get 3 times the improvement without the bad side effects. So some doctors are saying that, but not nearly enough. But then I ran across Dr. Esselson's study, and in his book, he talks about this study that involved 18 patients, and I read that and was just amazed. But he was criticized publicly for assuming that something that worked with 18 patients would work with a larger group of patients. So he went back and he got with some other researchers, and they raised a bunch of money, and they did a bigger study, which involved 200 patients. And each patient they would bring into the study, the doctor would bring him into his office and say, I really want you to eat this particular way. And for now, we'll call it the ideal diet. And we'll say more about what that is in a moment. But the doctor would say, I believe this is really going to be important to your heart disease. And 90% of them said, Doc, I'm in. I'm going to eat the way you said. The other 10% said, no, to eat this healthy way, you're telling me I can't eat certain things that I really like to eat, so I'm not going to do it. Doctor said, that's okay. Please stay in the study to allow us to track you. So now they have 2 groups. All of them were heart patients at risk. 10% of them continued to eat the way they always did. 90% switched to this ideal diet. They tracked them for years, and they did a really detailed tracking that included not only seeing how many died of heart disease, but how many had heart attacks that didn't lead to death, angina, stent emplacements, or bypass surgeries. So there were 5 different types of cardiac events that they tallied up. And eventually they published this work in a journal where I found it, and I picked out the 2 numbers, which is the cardiac event rate per patient for the group that didn't change their diet, and I scaled that to 100%. And then the other number was the cardiac event rate per patient for the group who switched to the ideal diet. And guess what the results were? 99% of the disease, the cardiac event rate, didn't happen in the group that switched to the ideal diet. That means essentially all of the leading killer in this country goes away if you eat properly. Wow. So the logical converse of that, the forward path is if you eat properly, you don't have heart disease. The converse of that is if you have heart disease, you're not eating properly. So if you have heart disease, it's your fault. This is a study that proved to me that that clog in my artery on the day of my cardiac arrest was my fault. Because if you eat properly, it just doesn't happen. Wow. Here, there's lots of evidence that supports this. There was a patient of the doctor's that had same sort of clog in his artery as I did, although where mine was in sort of one spot. This other patient had a whole long strip of his artery that was clogged, and they couldn't even put stents in it. The only alternative for this patient was to go down this hall to this other doctor who had this wacky idea that maybe diet would have some effect. And so this patient got on this healthy diet, and 2.5 years later, they took another picture of that same artery, and the clogs were gone. This artery healed itself. The human body has an amazing ability to heal itself if you quit abusing it 3 times a day because of your diet. And this has been shown not only for heart arteries, but also arteries that feed blood to the brain, arteries in the feet and legs. If your arteries are messed up, they can be messed up all over your body, but you can fix them all over your body by switching to a healthy diet. So what is this diet? First, we'll start with the things that are harmful. Red meat. Probably everybody listening knows about that. It's been in the news for decades about how harmful red meat is. But what people may not realize is that pork, chicken, and fish are just as harmful. And some experts would say that dairy is even worse. Milk, butter, ice cream, cheese. You take the heart disease caused by cheese and the cancer caused by cheese. Some experts call cheese the most damaging substance on the planet. Eggs are also harmful. Why are all these things harmful? Animal protein. Animal protein is highly inflammatory, and these things also have animal fat, cholesterol, and other types of fat. So the animal protein gets on the insides of your artery and inflames them, makes them weak, so that then the animal fat can get past that first line of cells and get underneath and start causing problems. So animal protein is harmful to us. Animal fat is harmful to us. The two in combination are the perfect storm to ravage our body top to bottom. So these are the things that are killing us. There are a few other things. Processed foods, heavily processed foods. I put a donut there as a placeholder, but there's a whole set of other foods that probably people really know. I shouldn't have to be telling them that candies, cakes, cookies, sugary breakfast cereals, these are all heavily processed and harmful to us. And then what is a surprise to many people is another thing that's harmful is vegetable oil. And vegetable oil, not only in fried foods, but oil finds its way into all kinds of products, including potato chips, corn chips, crackers. A lot of salad dressings have oil. You can find some that don't, but a lot of them do. Fake butters, even products that we think are healthy, like granola bars. You look in the ingredients list, and not far down from the top is oil. Now, I'm not saying that you should never eat any of these things. This is a free country. You can eat whatever you want. I'm just saying the science is very, very clear that if you eat these things on a regular basis, the most likely scenario for you is heart disease and you in a casket before your time. Your call. Or you could choose to eat a variety of healthy, colorful vegetables of all kinds. Emphasis on leafy greens would be good. Fruits in moderation, not too many. Beans are awesome. Whole grains, including corn, oatmeal, brown rice. White rice is okay, brown is better. Whole wheat, not that processed white stuff, but whole wheat. Potatoes are awesome nutritionally. The problem with potatoes in our society is the company they keep. You take this healthy potato, you cut it into strips and fry them in oil, you've just made it unhealthy. You take a wonderfully healthy baked potato and you slather it with butter or sour cream or cheese, you've just made it unhealthy. The potato itself, awesome. Even better, perhaps, would be sweet potatoes. There are societies on this planet that eat nothing but sweet potatoes. They don't have heart disease. They don't have colon cancer. Wonderfully complete food. Now, I'm not saying you should eat only these whole plants, but I'm saying the science is really, really clear. If you eat only these things, the most likely thing to happen to you is you'll live 10 to 14 years more than the people who ate the other stuff. And that might be enough to not only see your kids grow up, but your grandkids. I mean, that can be a big difference. And the closest you'll come to the graveyard in your old age is when you run through it and you see the gravestones of the people who ate the stuff that we talked about earlier, the animal products. Now, what might be more important than the extra years of your life is the quality of your life. In this country, the average number of years of disability before death is about 9. That's an average, not a maximum, but an average. Could be much longer than that. And these problems that cause disability are the same problems that this healthy diet eliminates. So you can have 9 years that really suck and then you die, or you can have 9 really vibrant, healthy, wonderful years followed by 14 to 20 more wonderful, vibrant years. Your choice based on what you choose to eat. Now, the researchers call this diet a low-fat, whole plant diet. You've heard the word vegan. Vegan means no animal products at all, no meats, no dairy, no eggs. So this is definitely a vegan diet, but not everything that's vegan is healthy. And so the researchers tend to not use the word vegan as much as a low-fat, whole plant diet. That consists of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and legumes, no meat or fish, no eggs or dairy products, no oils, including olive oil, not healthy, no processed foods. And the low fat comes in where you really want to reduce the percent of your calories that are from fat. Average American is about 35%. Studies have shown that if you go on a low-fat diet where they define low fat as 30% instead of 35%, it doesn't help much. And so people have concluded from those experiments that fat in your diet doesn't matter. It matters a lot. You just have to get much lower than 30 before it starts to kick in. Experts would say it should be less than 10% of your calories from fat. One expert that I listen to a lot would say 7% is about the ideal. Now, how are you going to make your diet have less than 7% of your calories from fat? Are you going to track all the calories you eat all day long and all the fat calories you eat all day long and divide and see whether it's 7% or less? That would be difficult. The better thing is just to choose a set of foods that are low in fat. So getting rid of the meat, eggs, dairy, and oils is a good start. But there are a handful of problematic whole plant foods that are high in fat. And those are nuts, coconut, and avocado. Now, if you're totally healthy by every metric, and that's the little asterisk on this guideline, if you're totally healthy by every metric, you can have a little bit of nuts, coconut, and avocado. That is, if your total cholesterol is below 150, your LDL is below 80, your glucose blood sugar is below 100, your blood pressure is below 120/80, all of these with no medications. Your body mass index says that you're in the normal weight range, you're not overweight, and you've never been diagnosed with heart disease or cancer. If all of those are true for you, you can safely have a little bit of nuts, coconut, and avocado. That is, you can have a little bit of sliced almonds in your salad, but it doesn't mean that you can have a 16-ounce jar of Planters peanuts and open it and eat it all in one go. That's not healthy for anybody. If you're healthy, you can have a little bit of coconuts, have some shavings on your entree or your dessert. It doesn't mean, oh, I'm giving up that ice cream, so I'm going to go with a non-dairy frozen dessert, which is made up almost entirely of coconut oil, which is 95% saturated fat. That's not okay for anyone. If you're totally healthy, you can have a few slices of avocado on your salad. It doesn't mean I can make a quart of guacamole and eat it all in one sitting. Not okay. Another guideline, be cautious with soy products. Whole soybeans are fine. There was initially some research that suggested there was a problem with it. That's since been shown the other way around, that actually benefits us by eating whole soy. But there's a lot of food manufacturers that use heavily processed soybeans to make fake meats. They take out the carbohydrates, they take out the fats, and they use the isolated vegetable protein or the textured vegetable protein that left behind, and they extrude that into things that look like meat. Not so healthy. Still, those fake meats are healthier than real meat because they don't have any cholesterol in them, but they're not particularly healthy. So eat the whole soybean that you'll get in soy milk, tofu, edamame, tempeh, but don't go for the fake meats that have soy component in them. Fruit juice is good for you in reasonably small quantities. You can cook with some fruit juice. But if you're going to replace your 44-ounce big gulp of Coca-Cola with a 44-ounce big gulp of fruit juice, not so healthy. So in moderation, please, with the fruit juice. Now, Caldwell Esselstyn, the author of this book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, he's been quoted as saying, some people think whole food plant-based diet is extreme. Now, in the context of our daily lives, where we've been told since we were little that milk is good for you and eat plenty of meat, it's the best protein out there, it does seem kind of extreme to eliminate those from our diet. Extreme. Again, Esselstyn says some people think whole food plant-based diet is extreme. He goes on to say 500,000 people a year will have their chests opened up and a vein taken from their leg and sewn onto their coronary artery. Some people would call that extreme. So I'd like you to think about that the next time you're going to reach for that cheeseburger or milkshake. Maybe replacing that with some vegetables isn't as extreme as having this saw cutting open the middle of your chest bone. Colin Campbell says, now switching to cancer, and I won't say much more about it, but this researcher, Colin Campbell, says casein, the main protein of cow's milk, is the most relevant chemical carcinogen ever identified. Wow. Carcinogen meaning cancer causing. Relevant meaning something that we would encounter in our diet. The most relevant chemical carcinogen ever identified. So does milk do a body good? No, it does cancer good. You want to fuel your cancer? Have some milk. Looking at diabetes for really quickly, there's two forms of it, type 1, type 2. They're actually very different diseases. They're both heavily affected by our diet. This plot shows, and this is from the book, The China Study by Colin Campbell. This shows a correlation between cow's milk consumption, which is shown in the horizontal axis, and type 1 diabetes in the vertical axis. So the countries that have more milk consumption have more type 1 diabetes. The real epidemic now is type 2 diabetes. And we're taught that this is caused by eating carbohydrates. That isn't the case. It's caused by eating fat. And the fat gets into the muscles and interferes with their ability to take in blood sugar, which is their fuel that they need. And as a result of that inability to take in the blood sugar for power, the blood sugar concentration goes up, which causes problems. But it's not the problem. The sugar is not the problem. It's the fat. Type 2 diabetes is generally progressive. If you have it and you go to the doctor and he gives you some medication, you say, will this medication cure me? If he's being honest, he'll say, no. And not only will this medication not cure you, you're likely to get worse over time, and we'll have to elevate the medications, maybe go from pills to shots. And as things go on, we may have to amputate a foot or a hand. You might lose an eye, and you're going to die painfully. That's how diabetes progresses. There's You can get gangrene in your foot, and that can lead to an amputation. You might turn to the American Diabetes Association and ask them, well, what should you eat? And they'll give you a diet which will help a little bit. But if you go on the diet that we already talked about, the research results show a 3 times better reduction in your diabetes, and that 3 times is enough better that it generally is a full cure within 2 to 4 weeks. How many people are suffering from this disease? It's getting worse and worse over time. They're losing limbs and dying painfully of something that they could get rid of in 2 to 4 weeks just by changing their diet. Wow. Here's a doctor from Northern California, Dean Ornish, who says, think about it. Heart disease and diabetes are completely preventable by making comprehensive lifestyle changes without drugs or surgery. Wow. Hypertension is also known as high blood pressure. That's a sort of a common thing that the doctors will tell you, take this drug and it'll fix it. Well, what is the real cause of this problem? It's those restrictions in your arteries, same ones that are causing your heart disease. But in this case, they're not actually clogging the artery to complete closure, but they're reducing the flow through it enough that your heart has to pump harder. Has to pump harder continuously, not just like when you're exercising, but all the time, just to get enough blood through that clogged artery. And that extra stress on your heart shortens your life. You can take medication which lowers the blood pressure, but it doesn't solve the root problem, which is the food that you're eating that's abusing the insides of your arteries. Diet can solve this problem, and there's both some long-term benefits and short-term benefits. Short-term benefit can be so quick that if you continue to take your blood pressure lowering medications, that can result in too low a blood pressure, which can cause you to pass out. So by all means, get rid of your blood pressure problem and then get rid of your blood pressure medication, but be ready to do that together. Don't just say, oh, I'm going to change my diet now, and in a month or two, I'll go in and get a blood pressure test from my doctor, and maybe he'll take me off the medications. But in the intervening time, you may have solved the problem so quickly that those blood pressure medications cause you a problem. So as you change your diet, every few days, you should be checking your blood pressure and being ready to taper off those medications. The Center for Disease Control publishes what the top killers are in this country. Heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, those are all affected by our diet. Some other diseases, accident, suicide, murder, not really that affected by diet. But if you aggregate all the causes of death caused by our food choices, it ends up being about 2/3. That means 2 million Americans are dying needlessly every year in this country because we're eating the wrong things. Wow. This also means if you consider yourself and 2 others you love. The 3 of you, if you insist on eating the standard American diet, statistically, 2 out of the 3 of you are going to die needlessly. Let's not let that happen. So the right diet can prevent, reduce, or reverse heart disease, cancer, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, osteoporosis, acne, arthritis, constipation, and so many other diseases. It's like every time I go to one of these medical conferences, I come back hearing some research about how it's been found that another few diseases go away if you eat this way. So I think the numbers like between 40 and 50 different diseases now just don't happen if you eat this healthy way. And the great news is it's the same diet that gets rid of all these problems at once. I want to talk briefly about biomagnification. This is a process by which toxins concentrate as they go up the food chain. So that if there's a little bit of toxin in some grass, and the cow comes along and it eats that grass, that toxin goes into its body. Now, one of the things that makes a toxin toxic is the body's inability to get rid of it. So over time, this toxin builds up in the cow's body. And by the time it gets to your plate in the form of either meat or dairy, that level of toxin has grown to between 100 and 1,000 times the level that is in the food of the cow. So we're eating something that's 100 to 1,000 times worse than what the cow is eating. In the oceans, it can get even worse than that. The toxins, of course, flow into the oceans from all over. They get taken up by the green plants in the ocean, which are eaten by krill or small fish. So by the time those krill or small fish get to be adults, their toxins in their body are 100 to 1,000 times the levels of what they're eating. And then along come the salmon or the tuna and eat the little fish, and they're eating the little fish their whole life. And so by the time they're adults, they've concentrated that toxin 100 to 1,000 times what's in their diet, which is already 100 to 1,000 times what was in the water. So they end up getting 10,000 to 1,000,000 times the toxins that are in the water, and that's what you're getting when you eat that fish. Now, to really look at all those toxins, we'd have to really zoom out to see them all. And there could be a mid-range view, which would be 100,000 times the level, or a high end, which is 1,000,000 times the toxin levels. But I found one study that showed not 1,000,000 times, but they found some salmon that had 9,000,000 times the toxin level in the flesh of the salmon than was in the water the salmon was swimming in. So you'd really have to zoom out for that. And you'd see that there's so much toxin relative to the fish that it's not a question of will you get some toxins with your fish. The question is, will you get a little bit of fish with your toxins? And the situation gets even worse. I found a report that found that they'd studied and found that a third of the fish caught worldwide are not used to feed humans. They're used as animal feed. So they're taking this highly toxic fish flesh and they're feeding it to the cows, chickens, and pigs, which then put their own level of magnification on top of that. And then we're eating that stuff. How
Were
do you
you
avoid
aware,
the...
John, that cows are a great ocean predator?
I didn't know that. No,
Yeah, yeah, they're
this,
the
this,
world's greatest ocean predator.
this protein meal that it doesn't, it sounds innocuous and sounds healthy for the cow, but no, it's got all this fish stuff in it.
Yeah.
Oh my. So how do we avoid these toxins? Just don't eat the animal products. None. So what are my recommendations for steps to long life and health? Learn everything you can. The fact that you're listening to Glenn's podcast here is awesome. Listen to all of them. Glenn is a great author. Of the 10 books that I recommend the most, 5 of them are authored or co-authored by Glenn. So get a hold of those, read them all. You need to be smarter than your doctor because they don't understand this stuff. They haven't read Glenn's books. And it doesn't take a lot to be smarter than most doctors because in medical school, they're just not taught the relationship between food and health. Some pick it up in other ways, and I have the greatest respect for them. But if you don't
Now,
know...
let me point out here, John, that the doctor you showed in that video of the yellow gunk was Dr. Michael Clapper, who has an organization called Moving Medicine Forward, a nonprofit precisely for this purpose of educating medical students about nutrition.
And I am so much in awe of Michael Clapper. He basically retired from his paying practice to go into this nonprofit stuff where he's just donating his time to try to help the situation, and more power to him. So once you learn what you need to do, which is don't eat any more animal products or oils, make the change. Be brave, jump in, make the change. There will be challenges, but with persistence, you can overcome them and at some point help others through these 3 steps. here's some things I'm doing to try to help. I've made this Nutrition Science Foundation, whose mission is to educate. We've got a website here, newsci.org, has a number of things posted, including, books and videos. You can see the button there. And again, you'll see lots of Glenn's stuff mentioned. There's a recipe section on my website. There's a doctor directory that, you can find one of these few doctors that do understand the benefit of plant-based eating. You put in your zip code and we'll try to find someone near you. If you're listening to this and you are a doctor who understands plant-based effects on longevity and health and would like to be listed, you can go to this website and get yourself listed as well. We would love that. If you need some motivation, we have some written success stories and some video success stories of people who have really gotten some of these nasty diseases out of their life by making this dietary change. And if you'd like to donate to the Nutrition Science Foundation to help us give away books, including lots of Glenn's books, we would love to get that financial donation. So how are you going to go about making this change? Let me quickly suggest two different approaches. One is you're going to do it yourself. You're going to read one of the recommended books that you'll find on the website. You're going to take your medical measurements. Spend some time. Again, this is for people who are just approaching this for the first time. Find out which plant-based foods you like. You won't like all of them, but I think you're going to find a lot that you really do like. If you're cooking for yourself, experiment with which of these really healthy things you're willing to cook. And once you know what you can eat, what you can be happy eating, go all in. Commit to not a lifetime necessarily, but 90 days. You're going to eat only plants, no oils. If you can't do 90, do 60. If you can't do 60, do 30. Some people succeed at this by tapering off, but psychologists who study this suggest it's sort of like cocaine. It's hard to taper off. It's much easier to just go all in. And at the end of that challenge period, take your measurements again. If you find your cholesterol's down, your blood sugar's down, your weight is down, your energy is up, and oh, by the way, you really started to enjoy eating these foods, then you might say, hey, this is something I can commit to for the rest of my life. And that would be a wonderful thing. And at some point, help others. Some might go through this with you. Many of our loved ones aren't where we are, and so we have to go through it by ourselves, but at the right time, you can maybe help them as well. Here's another way. You don't want to study, you don't want to cook, you just go to the website of Little Green Forks, and all right, our food company, I'm admitting that. We deliver throughout the continental US. The delivery is a little expensive. We use FedEx overnight morning express. But we'll get you that fresh food quickly. It's all whole plant-based, no oils, fresh greens and fruit. We have both comfort foods and gourmet foods. We try to do the best we can with the packaging. We also have a 30-day program. If you're really ready to commit, you will eat only Little Green Forks food for 30 days to get rid of your diabetes or lower your cholesterol. Contact us and we'll help with this special program. These are some of the things that I eat on a regular basis. Burgers with fries, fried, no oil, that is. Sweet potato ball is awesome, one of our favorite foods. Southwest salad, broccoli soup, pad thai. There's a dessert. We got this recipe from Chef AJ. This was pumpkin spice pudding. It actually doesn't have any pumpkin in it. It has sweet potatoes, bananas, and pumpkin spice, just 3 ingredients, but it tastes like pumpkin pie. Awesome. So this is where I used to be. In 2001, I was 205 pounds, 111 glucose, 238 cholesterol, 147 LDL. Here's where I am today, or recently, last year. 160 pounds, down from 205. My glucose went from 111, which was pre-diabetic, to 79, totally healthy. My cholesterol was at 238. Last check was 130. Remember, 150 is a healthy level, so I'm totally healthy. LDL was 147 before, now it's 62, totally healthy. But what I'm really proud of is I found the pair of shorts that I was wearing in 2001, and look at the belt length of what before there was no belt sticking out because it was all used up by my girth. And now I've got a lot of extra belt length, and that's sort of what I'm a little bit proud of. So if you want to order food from Little Green Forks, you can go to the website www.littlegreenforks.com. And on your first order, if you at checkout, if you use the coupon code GM24, think Glenn Mercer 2024, but
Just
just
have to remember my initials and my age, GM24.
all right, GM24, and that'll get you $15 off your first order of $30 or more. So
All
that's
right.
what I've got for you today and for your
Thank you.
audience, Glenn.
John, let's end the screen share. Thank you for that presentation. You did your part of giving us a compelling argument for why people should eat an all low-fat plant food diet. I didn't do my part. I did not get hit by a tornado. So it's going to be harder to make this go viral, but we'll maybe just on the strength of your presentation. Or
All
else I
right,
could
and
get
this
somebody to throw bricks at.
well, this will allow you to do a lot more podcasts in the future, which I'm sure will be also very important to your audience.
Yeah, I suppose there's that. Now, I just want to make a couple comments and a question for you. One thing you said was fruits in moderation. Um, is there any negative to fruits?
There can be. The fruits have a form of sugar called fructose, which isn't so great for us. The normal form of sugar, table sugar, is called sucrose, and it has two molecules that are joined together, one of glucose and one of fructose. The glucose is the power supply for our entire body. We absolutely need glucose. If we didn't have it in our body, we would be dead in seconds. The fructose, not so great. It can't really be metabolized by any part of our body except the liver. And when the liver metabolizes fructose, it turns into fat. So our body has a real hard time turning glucose into fat, but fructose, it can. I think I did actually see a research paper where I think it was pancreatic cancer also can metabolize fructose. So, but that's not something you want happening in your body. So the other part about fruit, if some people say, well, instead of eating an apple, which is maybe 100 calories, I'll put 2 apples and 2 oranges and 2 pears, 6 fruits into a blender, and I'll hit the button and I'll turn it into a smoothie and I'll drink it all at once. So all of a sudden you've drank 600 calories where you would never be able to eat 6 apples at once. Right. So be careful of how you process those fruits and kind of minimize them. And if I'm not mistaken, Glenn, I almost think that you maybe had McDougall tell you to.
Yes. Dr. McDougall once told me when my cholesterol was climbing higher than it should on my diet, he said, could be the fructose. And then when I saw you say fruits in moderation, I was wondering if that's what you were referring to.
That's one of them, definitely.
Apparently, therefore, if the fructose gets metabolized into fat, it could also bump up the cholesterol.
That could be the mechanism. I'm not entirely sure how.
Yeah.
But by the way, that fat that gets produced is fat in your liver. So you really don't want fatty liver.
Right. Now, there's one other point I'd like to make because there is a genetic component to cholesterol numbers. For some people, it's just harder, and I'm one of them. It's just harder to get it down than it is for other people. And it's something Dr. Esselstyn said. He said, I've never seen anyone killed by cholesterol numbers. What kills you is the meat and the dairy and the oil and the processed foods and so forth. So what I would say to my listeners is if you're eating the diet that John recommends, a whole food, low fat, plant-based diet, and I guess not getting too much fructose too. And if you're not at 150, but you're at 160 or 170, I'm not going to worry about you. You know, what's killing people is the meat and the dairy and the oil and the processed foods. And those are obviously related to those cholesterol numbers, but there's also a genetic component. So if you're eating right, two people who eat right, one person may have numbers a little higher than another.
So there's a converse side of that, which is there's a small number of people that even when they eat terribly, they have low cholesterol numbers.
That's right.
And I've had people say, well, you told me if I'm below 150 cholesterol, below 80 LDL, I'm not going to have a heart attack. Why should I bother with this diet? Well, there's cancer and digestive system problems and arthritis and on and on and on and on. So
Right. Right. So John, do you find that people hear your message and sometimes just change overnight, or it's takes a long time to get people? You have to hit them with the message over and over and over again.
it's a mix, Glenn. I would like to say that most people that listen to me change immediately, but I can't say that. There are a few, and just like there are a few who will read one of your books and throw it down and say, I'm never going to eat animal products again.
Mhm.
And we love those people, but we need to continue to work hard to reach the others. Sadly, I ran into a gentleman recently who'd been to hear some of my talks about 8-9 years ago,
Mhm.
and he had changed his diet and had dramatic results.
Mhm.
And I saw him, he came back to one of my talks and he's staggering with a cane and he can barely breathe. And he said, can you remind me, does this diet affect heart disease? It's like, yes. So he came back for a refresher to try to get motivated again, but how he could forget that, especially when he's suffering,
Yeah.
I don't get it. But for me, having the cardiac arrest was like getting a 2x4 in the head. Bam! It's like, okay, wake up! It's time to do something. Others, maybe need something like that before they're willing to change. But sadly, most people who have that 2x4 in the head don't survive.
Yeah.
Right? As the doctors say, that often the first sign of heart disease is death.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's important for people, anybody listening to this message, please don't wait too long. Make the change.
Yeah. And it's really not that hard to do to eat human foods. So, and there, some people say that, taste is the problem. Oh, they just love the taste of whatever sirloin steak or whatever. And to me, that's the dumbest argument, because we all know that our tastes change, our tastes in music, our tastes in all kinds of things through our lives change. So tastes are adaptable. So all you have to do is actually be brave enough to eat new and different foods, and you'll learn to love them. And then you'll hate the taste of what you think you like now. So it shouldn't take too much imagination to realize that you can change your taste. Eat Little Green Forks food, GM24, right?
Right.
All right. Enter that as your coupon code. John, I am so proud to be a coupon code. I can't tell you. It has always been my goal in life to be a coupon code. And it's a pretty good, it's $15 off 30 or more. So that's a good code. John, thank you for joining us today. Hope
Thanks
to
for
see
the
you soon.
opportunity.
Be well. Keep your cholesterol down.
Thanks, you too.
This has been the Glenn Mercer Show, where everyone listening turns vegan, regains their health, and annoys their friends and relatives. Find us on YouTube at The Glenn Mercer Show and across all your major podcast platforms. Don't forget to subscribe.